Hi, just want to get this lecture going. You can see the outline I've laid out here for this particular lecture. We're going to be going over PHP syntax. It's going to be kind of a whirlwind tour of the syntax. We can't spend too much time. Plus, I think these concepts you already know the concepts from other languages. And so we're going to be covering output, data types, selection, iteration, functions, creating classes with instance methods, and also classes with static functions, which should be part of any language course that you take. Furthermore, we're going to be looking at array handling, so how to map array data from one to another, and how to filter array data looking for particular subsections of the array that you want to get out of it. So that's what we'll be covering today in this PHP syntax lecture. Let's go ahead and move forward. One thing I wanted to assume is that we have PHP installed, and that we also have the Composer tool installed for PHP, because that's going to get us developing a PHP project a lot more quickly. So just as a reminder, let me jump over to the console here. We should have, if you do PHP V, you should have the version identified. And also, if you run Composer, should give you a list of commands that we can run. So with that understanding, we should be able to, let me bump the font size a little bit. We should be able to start a new project. And so to start a new project, we can run Composer init. Actually, first and foremost, you need to create a directory. So I'm gonna create a directory, PHP syntax lecture, and then I will navigate into that. Lecture. So you notice I'm now inside that new directory. Then you can run the Composer init, which is going to basically initialize a new PHP project for you. So it's going to run through, it's going to ask for like a vendor and a name, which is really not a big deal for us, but I'm going to put CSCD 378 and my name, or this name, which is just, again, I'm just going to put lecture. And description, these all, you can use the defaults for these if you want, it's not a big deal, but I'm just going to use the defaults and just enter through all of these. And what that does is basically that just creates a Composer JSON file, and then PHP can use that to set up and run some dependencies, and we'll use it later. I'll show you how to use it later, but you'll see that the contents of the file here is really not much right now, and that's okay. But at least gets us into a real, something we can work with here. And so I'm going to actually run my editor from here. And get this all set up. And so from here I can start a new file. And I'll call it basics. And so when starting a PHP file, you need to start the file with this question mark PHP. And since the rest of the file is going to be all PHP, the PHP interpreter will know to execute the PHP code written on this page. And so what I want to do now is walk through some of these basics here that we've identified and just look at the most simple syntax for those. And I think once you start seeing them, you'd be like, oh, okay, well, I've done something very, very similar in Java or Python. So I think you'll notice that right away. That's why I'm probably going to go through the basics part pretty quickly. So in order to output commands, we just use an echo. You can also use a print command. So you might see both examples. And if I run this, you'll see hello world down at the bottom. And so print, same thing. Another thing you'll kind of have to do is, set some new lines so you don't get things printed on the same line. So hello, goodbye. I'll be using echo, but like I said, if you're looking online, you might see both echo and print do the same thing. Another little observation, the lines are terminated by a semicolon, so you'll need that. So if I leave it off and try to run, I'll get syntax errors, so just something to watch out for, especially if you're coming from the Python world. So I can start declaring some variables now. So I have integers. We've already been using strings. I can have booleans, true, false. I can have floats. And we can have arrays. Pretty straightforward stuff. One little utility I'll be using throughout this example is this printr. So I can print things like, it's great for more like data structure, like arrays, objects, associative arrays. Speaking of that, matter of fact, I'll get to like associative arrays in a minute. But for now, let me just show you this printr, which I'm going to use. Notice I use echo to print out simple data types, but more complex ones like an array, I use like a printr. So that would look like this. It shows me kind of the whole, the index and then the value that's in there. So that comes in pretty handy. Another thing that you can check, we can look at like a if else or an if. So a selection structure, if count is greater than 3, echo greater than 3. I'll throw some of these on there. So we have greater than 3. We can also use something, we can also make this fail. And perform the else clause. So that's less than or equal to 20. And if I run that, I should get, yep, less than or equal to 20. So again, something common, the if else. We can write some iteration, so like for loops. I can have I equals 0, while I is less than 10, as an example. I++, and echo. I. Let's see if that prints them out. Yeah, I need to I need to get just some line breaks in there. There we go. So 0 through 9. What else here? Oh, one thing I've been typing it but haven't said anything about is all variable names start with a $sign. So that's just something you'll have to get used to, especially like, again, coming from another language. It's kind of funny. I'm working on a couple other projects right now, contracts, and I'm using Golang and Elixir, and they both, have their own ways of declaring things, and then PHP, which has $signs for variables. So, depending on the language you're in, you could be especially as a web application developer, it's not uncommon to be like in JavaScript land and then some other back-end language which could have a different syntax. So that's kind of one of the key points of being a computer scientist and an engineer, is knowing those basics, knowing those fundamentals, problem-solving skills, and then switching from language to language. If you have that foundation, you should be able to switch syntaxes in a reasonable amount of time. So just another example of that. What else do we have here? We can iterate over and display our names. So now that we have the for loop, we can, let me grab this. So while I is less than the count of names, so we want to iterate over the array, we can print out the names. Let's see if that'll print out names and then all the names listed below it. And there we go. Cool. So iterating and accessing each element of the array, but referencing, sometimes it is necessary to reference the array by index, but there's also a nicer way to iterate over the array in sequential order, and that's using a for each. So we can for each over the names as name. So name is like a scope level variable that's defined within the scope of this for each block. So we're going to iterate over the collection as name is our local loop block variable, and then we can do basically the same thing. We should see the iteration of names twice, and we do. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to show you was creating a function. So just a standalone function. I can create something like add, take a number, take a couple numbers, and return. So we need to return the answer out of here. And then we can call that easily. Some of this. So add, and we can throw a couple numbers in there. And so you'll see the sum down there. change it up. So that looks pretty straightforward. We can also give these defaults, which is handy. So I'm going to default these to 0 in the input argument parameter list here. And so that if I can call this with no parameters, I can call it with one parameter, and you'll see the results. So when I call them with no parameters, they both defaulted to 0, and I got 0 plus 0. And then when I passed in one parameter, what it did is it assigned the first variable to 83, and then the second variable just defaulted to 0. So sometimes that's handy for default values, depending on if you need it or not. Sometimes you want that to break too. So maybe you don't want the flexibility. Maybe you need those values and you want the callers of those functions to actually pass in values. And if it doesn't, you want it to break, which is fine. You want it to be more strict API to your code. So that's just more of a flexibility thing. And what else here? Oh, the associative array thing. So the associative array, so for example, it's an array, but with key value pairs. So you can set a key and then point it to its value. So those come in handy, and especially if you're taking data from like JSON and converting it into something PHP can interact with. A lot of times you'll see JSON get converted from its format into an associative array in PHP. Then you can manipulate and deal with it however you want within PHP, which is pretty nice. So then to be able to access a value, I can and then you just access it, by its key. And then you can also, let's see if I print that out. So John Doe. Another handy trick that can be used is if you're expecting something to be in that associative array and it's not there, you can use this trick. So let's say I'm looking for an address. And if I were to try to access this, like this, and then print that out, I'm going to get undefined index address. So it says, hey, there's no address defined inside this associative array. However, there are times when it can be handy. We have this kind of default operator, it's kind of null coalescence operator, which says, hey, attempt to get something out of this associative array, or attempt to get something out of this variable. And if it's not there, just use this default value, address not given. So that's what the double question mark is. So now when I try to print it out, I get address not given. So that will come in handy, especially in output. And when we get to building web pages, there's just some times when you're trying to display information, maybe user didn't input it, and so instead of defaulting to null or getting some sort of error, you can give it some default value, which then we can move on and display something on the page. So that will definitely come in handy later. All right, moving on from associative arrays, let's look at creating a class. And so let's take this idea here, this profile, oops, code here. There we go. Okay, so let's take our code, convert it from an associative array to a class that represents the same data. So I'm going to create a class called profile and give it a name and age. I'm going to create a constructor, which is an underscore construct. And this is the, remember, constructor, same thing, in Java, PHP, other languages that support this, is this is the special function that gets called when you instantiate a profile. So we're going to have it accept a name and age, and then we can assign those using this, which will assign it to its local instance data. So that should be good enough to make us, let's see, halfway dangerous here. So I can then now instantiate a profile. So we can do new profile, pass it in name and age, and I can display that information. I'm just going to use that print R. Then that'll get us, we can analyze what that object looked like. Cool. So with that understanding, we then can go ahead and build objects that way. We can build out more elaborate, PHP supports inheritance. They support interfaces for like polymorphism. Some more kind of cool things, if you need to structure your code using some design patterns. There's definitely some support for that using polymorphism and inheritance. So we were not going to dive into that now, but it definitely is there. It supports it. And so, hey, there might be a lecture later this quarter where we need to leverage some of that. So we will do that if it requires it. One other thing I want to show is if I try to echo out profile, just want to make an observation with you. Notice we get object of class profile could not be converted to a string. So if there's ever a time, and a lot of times there are, when your object needs to be represented as a string, you want to almost always just kind of, as you create a constructor, you also want to create what's called a toString. And so it's also a special function, underscore toString, because you want your object to be able to represent itself in a string context. So whether that's being output or being concatenated or something like that, you want your objects to be able to represent themselves. So most of the time you'll just kind of create one by default. So I'll just do that here. Age. So now if I run this again, I get a nice friendly output because the object knows how to represent itself as a string. So just kind of rule of thumb there, you'll have a constructor, toString, and then you can start adding your utility methods that you need. So your instance methods, excuse me. Okay, so finally, reason why I said utility, but there are times to create classes that are more utility-like. So they're not really associated to creating objects from the class. They're just more to serve as a namespace wrapper around some functions that serve a particular purpose. So an example I'm going to use for that is I'm going to create a class called math. And then I'm going to create some functions, and the only difference between an instance function or instance method and a utility static one is you just add the static keyword. And not only that, there's also a difference in how you call them. So in order to call that, you just use the, I can spell, you can use the dot dot notation to actually call a static function. So there's the output down there. I could have another one. I'm just, for the sake of more examples, print product. See, what am I missing here? Oh, function. So then I can call that down here. So math is like our class namespace. And that should print that down below. Is that right? No, I don't think that's right. Oh no, it is the product. I was thinking the sum. Yeah, the product. So yeah, cool. So to take a quick review of what we have here, we have echo and output statements. We have variables with $signs, different data types. I'm using print R to go over, I can output more complex structures like arrays and objects. We have selection structures, we have iteration. We can iterate using an I variable and a counter variable. We can for each through collections. And now we can create functions, associative arrays. We can also, we have the, kind of a default null coalescence operator, that's what it's called. We can represent things as in classes and objects, and also have utility classes with static functions. So that, again, is a whirlwind tour of PHP syntax. And so the next thing I want to do now is jump into, if we look at, we've looked at some of these basics. The next thing I want to look at is array handling, so doing some mapping and filtering. And so with that, let me create a new file. I'll just call it filtering mapping PHP. Oops. Get that started. And so there's in PHP, there's some legacy ways of interacting with your arrays, and then there's some new libraries that we can leverage to interact with our arrays. So first I want to show you what this will look like in some legacy PHP code. Actually, if I copy over, let me grab names since we'll be messing with arrays. I'm also going to throw in a null value here. And what I want to do is I want to remove nulls, and I want to uppercase all the names. Okay, so in order to do that, there's, like I said, kind of the prep for this is that there's going to be times you're getting things from API calls, you'll be querying a database, and you're going to get the data in a certain form, and it may not be what you expect. And so you'll have to filter it, clean it, do things to get it in a manageable fashion so you can perform operations on it. So it's a good skill to have for sure. So let's go ahead and start looking at how we might do this. So in PHP, there's legacy functions all over the place, and you'll be surprised how many of them there are. There's just hundreds of these functions for all sorts of data types. So in PHP, we have a filter array. So I'm going to use it like this. I'm going to create a variable called non-null names. And we're going to use a function called array filter. We're going to filter over the names. And it takes a function. And the local block scope variable is going to be name. And that's going to filter through names and look at each name at a time, and it's going to return only the the names that are not null. And so I'm gonna print R that, and you'll see what that looks like. In fact, well, you already know I don't need to print R that, but I just want you to see what this looks like without the null value. So there's that without the null. So it filtered out the null. So that's super handy. So the next thing we need to do is we need to uppercase all the names. So to do that, we can, we can use an array map. So I'm going to create another variable called upper names. This is going to take a function with your block variable called name, and this is going to return, actually, and this one, the syntax is a little different on this one. This accepts the variable as a second parameter, whereas you notice up here array filter takes it as the first parameter. So that's some of the legacy functions for you. It's inconsistent. So I'm going to use it str to upper function. I'm going to print R this. And I'm going to run that, and notice now the names are all uppercase. Cool. And then finally, actually, I want to sort this too. So we want to remove nulls, uppercase, and then sort it. So sorted names equals, I'm just going to throw this into a sort function. And then so notice down here on the last run we have Neo, Trinity, Morpheus. So that should be sorted when I run this next. Let's see, sorted names, upper names. Oh, that is a successful run. I don't even need to assign that. because the sort will modify the array in place. So I just need to output upper names. So now we have Morpheus, Neo, Trinity in alphabetical order. So that works, that's fine, that's dandy. However, I do want to talk about writing code in a more modern fashion. And a more modern fashion is we want to be able to take these three functions and we want to be able to pipe them or transform them in a more legible manner. Because notice what we're doing here is we're running a function, assigning it a variable. Running it a function, assigning it a variable. Running a function, and then outputting and using it. So that can get disconnected and not as legible over time. So a more modern fashion is we want to be able to pipe or transform the data in a fashion. So you may have seen piping before. Let me jump over to the command line here. And pipes are very common in Bash, Z shell, Unix, Linux. I think Windows has the Bash shell now. Very common in those worlds where you can take one value and pipe it over to another. So for example, if I look at the processes on my machine, I can look at these, and if I wanted to, I can use this pipe operator and grab my name, and it finds just the processes with my name in them. So it filtered this bigger list down to this list, and then I can pipe again, and I can actually sort that. So it takes the values here and sorts them. So if you look from left to right in this command, so I look at the processes, I pipe over to the grep command, and then I sort the resulting list, which is really, really cool. If you can take that concept and take that and move it into your code can become much more contextual. Like there's a context. What you're doing is you're taking data, you're filtering it, and then you're sorting. So we want to take that concept, which is it's moving its way into programming more and more, and use that. So I'm going to jump back over to our code. And what we're going to do is we're going to incorporate some libraries built into, let me see if I have those. I know I had a web page up. Yeah, let me get it over here. In Laravel, there's actually some libraries. Let me bump the font size on that. In Laravel, there's a collections library, which gives us a bunch of cool, handy methods we can use to filter, sort, access our collections in a really powerful way. And then also there's, let me see, what else do we have? We have helpers, which give us some other array functions and path and string manipulation. Definitely some things to look into. If instead of writing some complex helper function which manipulates a string or an array, take a look through these libraries first to see if you can use some of these. Come in really handy. So we're actually going to use some of these ourselves, and I'll jump over and show you how to do it. First thing we need to do is, assuming we're still in our project here, yeah, we have basics, filter. Yeah, so this is where you had that composer file comes in handy. And so what I want to do here is I want to install the ability to, here, let me type this in. We're going to use Composer to require or download and install the collections and the array helpers that Laravel provides. So this makes it super easy to do it. So when I run this, I'm going to go ahead and execute this. It's going onto the internet right now and downloading those libraries and making them a part of this project. Pretty cool and easy. So notice it's downloading, installing, updating my composer.json. And so if I cat what's in my composer JSON file, notice it downloaded and installed the latest Illuminate support, which includes a collection and array stuff. So now, in order to use that in our code, we need to also do a couple things here. We need to add this Autoload file, which if you look over here in vendor, there's a file Autoload, which does some magic as far as allowing you to reference the libraries that are used over here. For example, there's Illuminate right there, there's support, and while we're here, there's array, and you can look at all the source code for all the functions there, it's a great way to learn as well. And then collection is probably in here too, so again, that's just for reference. You can look at that on your own time, but that's what the Autoload does. It allows us to reference those libraries. And then in order to use a particular library, you actually have to bring it in and use it. So I'm going to use Illuminate, hopefully I spelled this right, support, Illuminate support, collection. So we'll find out soon enough whether I spelled something wrong or not. And so now I want to get back to reinforcing the concept of, like in Unix, you can pipe. Well, you can also bring that concept from the Unix shell world into your code. And remember, what I'm trying to do is alleviate these three disconnected functions, which are creating variables and doing that. I want to be able to create that type of flow within your code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a names collection and use collect. And what that's going to do is take this array, which is just a standard PHP array, and turn it into an Illuminate collection, which will allow us to do some of this, which I'm about to show you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another variable called modified names. And I'm going to take that names collection and I'm going to remember the goal was to remove nulls, uppercase all the names, and sort. So I'm going to, you have this built-in reject, and it takes a function and it's going to return. Remember, this particular function is called reject. So it's going to basically remove any of the names that are empty. Okay, cool. So here's where the awesomeness comes in. The awesomeness comes in is that now we can chain, or kind of like pipe, the result of that into a map, which takes a local function block. That'll return str to upper. So that'll take the non-null collection. It'll go through and map over the collection and uppercase. And then we can finally connect it or chain that to the sort. So this is the concept of rejecting, mapping, and then sorting all within one statement, assigning to one variable, and the context is all in one thing. So it's just so tight, really nice. So I'm going to print our modified names, and you'll notice we get the same results. Morpheus, Neo, Trinity. No, so you might notice here the indexes are still kind of whacked out. The indexes followed their original definition. And so if you want that to be squared away, if you care about your index order, you can fix that. But again, for now, I just want you to notice that here's the array we did earlier, and then here's the array we used using the library from Illuminate. But if you want to clean up your indexes as well, you can just throw in the values. There's a values you can throw on there. And if I run this again, it fixes the indexes for you. So tight, very, very cool. So the last thing I want to show you is I want to take this knowledge now, is I want to take it and apply it to an example. And that example, I'll just create a new file called cars. And I have some predefined data that we have here. So we have some car data. And so what I want to be able to do is take this data, which is very representative of something you might get from like a JSON array or something. And it's already in an associative array now. And I want to be able to map and create some car objects and access some information from it, etc., etc. So I'm going to take some of the things that we've been learning and apply it here in this particular example. So I'm going to create a car. Create a constructor. Assign our values. Create a toString. And so what I want to do is I want to map and create an array of, I want to convert this associative array of arrays into an array of objects. And so we can now take that and map over and create that. Now, one way that I've seen people do this, and I'm basically discouraging you to do it, is I've seen people create like an array and then they'll for each through it like this, and then they'll append to the array, which is what that syntax does. Instantiate a car, right? So basically they create this collection up here, and then they walk through and append to it. All right, so now we have this array of objects here. But that was kind of the whole purpose of me showing you how to map the data in the previous example. So this is something I don't want to see. Okay. You don't need to do this if you use map instead, which is the preferred way to do it. So let's go ahead and do that using our map. And so I'm going to create a cars variable. Cars collection. Oh no. Where's the, oh, yeah. I need to get this into a collect form. So take it from a PHP array into an Illuminate collection. So we need to wrap it in this collect function. So car data. We're going to take that car data, stick it into, convert it to a collection. We're going to iterate over that collection, car collection. Now we get to use that map again. I probably could. So it's going to map over, and for each array, it's going to take those values and create a car out of it. And so that's why we're doing a new car for each iteration through. And it's going to map that. And so to confirm, let's go ahead and just print that out. Clear the console. And it did it. So for each element, we have an object. Notice the object there. So now that we have that, another thing we can do is we can filter down the array. So I'm going to give you one last example here. So I'm going to look for cars above, the year above 2000. So I'm going to take my cars that I have and filter that. And return any cars with a year greater than 2000. So let's confirm that that works. And notice here's the resulting array. So we have a Chevy Malibu with a year 215 and a Highlander of 212. So that was a way for us to filter that collection and get specific things out of that collection based off attributes of the objects in the collection. So super, super powerful. There's a lot more of those, like I mentioned over here, that allow you to do some really, really neat things. Well, that about wraps it up for that. I mean, that does wrap it up for this lecture. Just to review that the lecture contents of this, went over lots of PHP syntax examples. Over here, we looked at filtering and mapping arrays. We looked at legacy, but also the collection library. And then we applied that collection library into this particular example of cars. So I'll post these examples with this lecture, and should be able to help you a lot on your next assignment. Until the next lecture, have a good one. See ya.